All right, welcome to the June 6, 2023 regular meeting. Doing some AV. Test. Nope, I'm still on Matt. I'm on somebody's. Check. I'm just going to keep waiting until I echo. Do you want me to keep going? I can hear myself. Okay. Welcome to the June 6, 2023 regular meeting of the Ann Arbor Planning Commission. For detailed information on meeting procedures, please review the full printed meeting agenda provided. Ms. Kelly, will you call the roll?
Certainly, noting that this evening Commissioner Gibrandel, Commissioner Abrams, and Commissioner Mills have noted their absence. Commissioner Weish.
Here.
Commissioner Clark.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Dish.
Here.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Here.
Commissioner Salve.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you.
I do want to note, though, you have 6 members, so that means it would require an affirmative vote of all of you to pass a positive recommendation on any item.
Great. All right, moving on to approval of agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Commissioner White, seconded by Commissioner Dish. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say yay.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of May 16th, 2023? Moved by Commissioner Lee, seconded by Commissioner Dish. Discussion on the minutes? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Next up are reports to the Planning Commission, including City Council, Planning Commissioner, officers, committees, and written communications. So, Councilmember Dish, do you have anything to report?
I do. Council unanimously passed the prioritization of rezonings along Plymouth and Washtenaw. So rezoning to TC1. So that will come back to us, and we can do it without extensive hand-wringing over its imperfections, because it is better than the current zoning. And we also passed a resolution that might or might not affect this body that has to do with seeking incentives to foster green development. And those are incentives possibly in the nature of fees, but also in the nature of process, because we're hearing a lot about that. And we passed something that I don't know if it would interest you all, but we did repeal a portion of the building code that requires landlords to provide voter registration information. And I bet I forgot something. Mr. Leonard?
I'll just add one thing. There was an amendment to the development agreement for 2111 Packard. This is a project that was approved by the Planning Commission a while ago. The petitioner asked and received an amendment to reduce the solar requirement from a 175 kilowatt system to a 120 or 115 kilowatt system. So that was one other change.
Was that a consent agenda item?
It was.
Indeed. I did not study carefully.
Still great that the petitioner is continuing to commit to a large amount of solar outside of any regulatory requirements of our code.
Great. Do we have any other reports from Planning Manager? Ms. Kelly?
Yes, at your 6:13 working session, you will hear two pre-PUD conferences, one for 120 Packard and another for 2935 Birch Hollow Drive. And in response to action by council last night, there will be a preview of a rezoning proposal for the Plymouth and Washtenaw corridors to TC1.
Great, thank you. Any other commissioner, officers, or committee liaisons have anything to report? Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
The one time, and I have to talk. You guys may or may not have seen this. Last month, the Council of the Commons voted to disband, and then that was approved by Council last night. So the work will be taken up by Parks, I believe, and with city staff support.
Thank you for your service on that board.
Oh, yeah. That's the important thing. Well, not that, but we had a liaison to the Council of the Commons, and so we no longer will need that. So I'm all in on the comp plan.
We'll find you something else to do.
I'll solve the housing crisis.
Note that in the minutes. Okay, anyone else? Great. Now we're moving on to public comment. We do have some written communications as well, but this is an opportunity for persons to speak up to 3 minutes about an issue that is not listed on the public hearing of this agenda. We will first call on individuals present to address the commission and then remote participants. To speak during public hearing remotely, press *9 if listening by phone, or use the raise hand feature when viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers who have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of their phone number or by name if available for those accessing through the web link. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so we may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time? Seeing no one. Is there anyone that would like to address the commission remotely?
There's one hand raised. Adam Yaskevich, you have permission to address the commission.
Hi, this is Adam Jaskevich, 1430 Las Vegas Drive in the 4th Ward. And I noticed on your agenda tonight, I'm not going to speak to the specific item right now. There's yet another proposal for a drive-through, and I'm just wishing that that you could get it on your work plan to eliminate the special exception use for drive-throughs and just make it blanket, no drive-throughs in Ann Arbor. I think it's just kind of a waste of time for people to have to keep calling in and saying, you know, please don't approve yet another drive-through, whether it's a bank or a restaurant or whatever. It goes against our stated goals as a city in A20 as well as moving together toward Vision Zero. So please eliminate that use entirely, and also don't approve any more drive-throughs. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there are no other callers at this time.
Thank you. So we'll move on to public hearings for the next business meeting.
A public hearing on the following items will be held by the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission on Wednesday, June 21st, 2023 at 7 p.m. 2670 to 2690 Ann Arbor Saline Road, 2670 and 2690 Ann Arbor Saline Road for City Council approval. A request to rezone these 2 parcels totaling approximately 1.6 acres from R1C single family residential zoning to O office district zoning. No new development is being proposed. And secondly, a continued public hearing for 1601 South State Street, Southtown project rezoning, site plan, and street vacation for City Council approval. A project with 3 petitions to redevelop the block bounded by South State Street, White Street, Henry Street, and Stimson Street. 1 petition to rezone a block of 10 parcels from R4C to C1AR zoning with conditions. Another site plan for City Council approval to construct a 220,000 square foot mixed use building, and a petition to vacate the public alley in the block.
Thank you. And as before, I'll be recusing myself of the second hearing for the next meeting. Now we move on to regular business. And so the first on the agenda we are going to look at the petition, proposed amendments to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.15, permitted uses to define and allow banquet hall use in mixed-use zoning district. Commissioner Lee.
I will be recusing myself from this particular hearing simply because the petitioner is my employer. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I will hand it to staff.
So now is a fine time. This just means that any motion, this will fail. However, it can still be forwarded to City Council for their consideration.
Okay.
And you have a quorum to continue conducting business.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're getting ready.
Thank you. This is I'm used to two screens. I'll survive. Before you this evening is a petition that is part petition and part staff recommendations to amend Chapter 55, the Unified Development Code. The petition was to add event space. It asked that event spaces be allowed in the office district. It described them, the desire was a place for celebrations, ceremonies, weddings, receptions, and similar functions. And the benefits are to include it's a complementary use to other O district uses. It will increase the adaptive reuse of existing office buildings and strengthen our local economy and sense of community. But when the planners got a hold of this, we agreed that there is a need for a distinct land use type. These type of event spaces are currently permitted wherever there is a restaurant. It can be considered a temporary restaurant, if you will, but it is not specifically defined in the ordinance. We field a lot of phone calls, and there is a clear need for a distinct land use type for this sort of assembly use. The staff would like to think more comprehensively about this petition. It should not be exclusive to the office district. This is something that is appropriate for all of the mixed-use districts. And we'd like to think more consistently using common language to get our point and our land use clearly across. So therefore, staff, we recommend that the zoning ordinance be amended to add a banquet hall use. This is a definition that is used in most other zoning ordinances as opposed to event space. Event space and a similar term, event venue, have other common definitions, which I don't think are quite right for the city of Ann Arbor. Banquet hall is also mentioned in the building code, and I think there's a desire by some to sort of more align the zoning ordinance with the building code. One aspect of that is using commonly defined terms will greatly help all parties involved have that shared understanding. We are proposing to define banquet hall as a building or portion of a building made available for temporary assembly or gathering of people, such as a conference or meeting, party, wedding, reception, fundraiser, display, or other similar occasion, which may or may not have food and beverage service. This is where a restaurant can host a banquet, but a banquet hall is not necessarily a restaurant. You do not always have to have food as part of your meetings and conferences and so forth. The zoning ordinance. The Unified Development Code actually has three sort of land use categories. Now, these are informal groupings, but this term is used throughout the UDC, and that is residential, circled on the screen, mixed use, and non-residential special purpose. With these amendments, we're suggesting that by including banquet hall use in the office district, as well as all of the mixed-use districts, we'll bring them all sort of more closer in alignment. The intent statement of the office district does talk about how it should be a buffer between the non-residential and special use purpose district uses and residential uses. But it is just one of the mixed-use districts, and we believe that all of the mixed-use districts can function as this type of buffer. And by adding a banquet hall to mixed use in general and office specifically, we are not diminishing its ability to act as that buffer. If you read closely, we believe that it doesn't say that office should buffer residential, that residential needs to be encapsulated by the office district. Rather, one of the mixed-use districts should encapsulate the non-residential districts if they are in close proximity to the residential. And while we're at it, we are proposing some additional amendments, again, to bring the office district more in line with the other mixed-use districts. We are recommending that the personal services category have its limitation to just the beauty salon portion of it be removed, and that personal services be allowed in the O district. Also, the fraternities, sororities, student cooperatives, club headquarters, community centers, religious assembly, private K-12 schools, and indoor recreation be sort of promoted in the office district from special exception uses to primary uses. We are also proposing that the broad term of veterinary, kennels, and animal boarding be split up, and a new use be split up into veterinary offices and kennels and animal boarding. The veterinary office, a definition is proposed, and it is proposed to be allowed in mixed-use districts just as medical, dental, or just as people healthcare, pet healthcare would go in there. And then kennels and animal boarding would remain as currently regulated. No changes to that, although we had to separate out that definition. And finally, recommending that trade and industrial schools also be included in the O district. Staff is recommending approval of it. Happy to answer any follow-up questions, but I think I covered it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So now we will open up the public hearing for this petition item. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed UDC amendments. We will first call on individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants. To speak during the public hearing remotely, press *9 if listening by phone, or use the raised hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers who have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of the number or by name if available if accessing through the web link. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so we may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time? Seeing no one, is there anyone who would like to address the commission remotely?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay. Well, we will close the public hearing, and I will read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the following amendments to Chapter 55, the Unified Development Code, Section 5.15.1, primary uses to permit or amend banquet hall, restaurant, bar, food service, fraternities, sororities, student cooperative housing, club headquarters, community center, religious assembly, private K-12 school, indoor recreation, veterinary, kennel, animal boarding, and trade industrial schools. Section 5.15.2, accessory uses to eliminate restaurant, bar, food service as an accessory use in the office district. Section 5.16.3M, to eliminate use-specific standards for personal services. and Section 5.37.2, specific definitions to define banquet hall and redefine veterinary, kennel, and animal boarding. Moved by Commissioner White, seconded by Commissioner Hammerschmidt. We are in discussion. Is anyone? Commissioner Dish?
I just have a couple of clarification questions where my understanding was fuzzy. So is it, oops, sorry about that. Is it the case that these kinds of event spaces are not currently permitted in all mixed-use districts, but only currently permitted where there's a restaurant? Is that right?
Yes, there are 8, 9. The restaurants are permitted in, let me be factual, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 mixed-use districts. Restaurants are permitted in 9 of them.
Oh.
Therefore, these event spaces can occur in 9 of the 10. This would make it 10 for 10.
And O being the 10th.
O being the 10th.
Okay, so they're already permitted. So the thing is, I was just trying to
They
tease
are
out.
already permitted.
And people don't understand that.
No, it's not. Apparently, and by the plethora of evidence, it's not intuitive.
Yes. Okay. So that's great. So what is happening is by introducing this new name, we are flagging that this is and has been permitted in all the mixed use, in 9 of the 10 mixed uses, and we're extending it to the 10th,
Correct.
which is office.
Correct.
And that's where we get the big gain in adaptive reuse.
Right.
Along with maybe a bowling alley or something that will go into these defunct office spaces. I was delighted to see the indoor. I do not know how to make that stop other than turn off my phone. Do you? Yeah, is it that? The silent mode will do it. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So, and then there was, I think, no, that's the only thing I wanted to know for
Okay.
sure. Okay, that's cool. I got it.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to take a quick left turn and talk about parking. There's no parking requirements for restaurants now, and so what I didn't see is the parking table amended to include these new categories. How would staff interpret if something came about, like there's no minimum or maximum, so we wouldn't have to refer to the table, correct?
Currently, we'd use the closest, good point. Currently, we'd use the closest analogous one. If it is located in a shopping center, then the maximum for the shopping center would apply. The office district, office uses have a parking maximum as well. I would consider adding it to the parking table, or perhaps another generation of changes to the parking table would further consolidate or simplify the lack of parking requirements and the parking maximums.
Okay. And then maybe this is, I guess I don't have too much, because right now, as we changed our parking, we don't have parking maximums for restaurants in all the other districts, so it wouldn't happen here in the office as well. But this is a very nuanced one. I don't know how often, but the veterinary kennel has a parking maximum of 1 per 250 square feet. So would you still interpret it that way, even though those definitions are split up, that a veterinary clinic would have a parking maximum of 1 space per 250 square feet, even though that table's still combined, if not in the CDC edit?
I'm thinking, well, the kennel component of it is not functionally changing.
Right.
So that would still apply.
But would you be comparing it to like more of a medical office, because that's more
Yes.
comparative, instead of comparing it back to a kennel when we're looking at what parking?
The veterinary office portion?
Yeah.
I think it would fall under the either the medical, dental, or just general office.
Okay.
It is becoming a subset of office.
Okay. So I guess those are just kind of things that I guess I'm curious from staff if that's something that we could either make sure to match. Well, so maybe a couple process questions. We're going to technically deny this tonight, but it moves forward. Council has to actually make the final decision to adopt this.
Yes.
And so they may see whatever vote number and then move forward. And I'm curious, relative to this parking, it's just a few lines. I don't know if we should be updating it here or if it should move on, but I just see
I think it's up to the will of the commission, because if you want to share that as a suggestion, you can pass the amendment and the entire motion would still fail, but the information would be carried forward.
okay.
So it's up to you whether you want it to be reflected in your discussion or if you'd like to memorialize it as an amended motion.
I guess I'm concerned of sorting
and-
out the actual math at the table versus making a recommendation for staff to review it prior to going to city council as the other path forward.
I
As part
would
of the new
say,
staff report.
I would say just in your discussion, be clear if you are looking for a very specific amendment, like just for discussion, veterinary offices should have a maximum of 2 parking spaces, just for discussions. Or if you are just looking for those uses to be mentioned and clarified in the parking standards. And then we can implement whatever that consensus is.
Okay. So I would just like staff to review the veterinary, include changes before it goes to city council that the veterinary clinic has a line item in our parking table. And that matches to our office. If that doesn't have a maximum or it does, that those two match. If once you reconcile that actually makes sense. I trust staff to review and make a healthy recommendation to our goals about parking. And then the same for the banquet hall to match restaurant to be added as a line item, which currently has no parking maximum. But just so that those are clearly included in the amendments, so that our use table and our parking use table match. Is that as noted? Just, I don't know if it's an amendment, because I really want to make sure that you get the numbers right, from a staff perspective, instead of digging into those details at the table here.
Yeah, no, I think I think you're bringing up bigger questions. Probably one of the things that we really need to think about is restructuring our parking. We did, when we eliminated minimum, we sort of went in, we pulled out a column, and I think these are great points. I don't know that I didn't spend a lot of time. I guess I don't want to speak for Alexis and Hank, but what this tells me is we might want to evolve to our parking table to, instead of trying to articulate all the uses, have an answer to that. It morphs into only the uses that are listed there have some standard beyond no minimum parking is required, and we're not there yet. So I understand where you're coming from. I want to be honest. We didn't notice the changes to the parking section, so it's conceivable I might come back to you and say, hey, I think it's worthwhile for us to actually present these to you. But I think it's a great observation.
It's the only kind of hesitation I have is that a banquet hall can be a lot of parking, but in very small chunks, and I would hate for our land use to change significantly, like a Black Friday parking lot, if we don't have parking maximum.
I just want to be clear: we're not proposing to add any minimum parking requirements.
But if we don't have maximums, a developer may decide to build a giant parking lot to support a large event space.
I get that, but again, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
We have a lot of uses that don't have maximum parking. I think I see where you're coming from. This one might be more prone to that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a bigger
gotcha.
assembly, more cars than a lot of our other uses on the table. So this might just come up in Commissioner Pro's business, because I would be concerned with keeping a higher intensity use without a parking maximum for very long on our UDC. But I think that this is hopefully it really help. I think it's a great incremental change for that adaptive reuse that I keep talking about. So
Already covered in TC1.
yeah. those are all my comments. Anyone else ready for a vote? Staff, can you roll call?
Commissioner Weiss,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Dish,
Yes.
Commissioner Hammersmith,
Yes.
Commissioner Salve.
Yes.
This motion fails.
Great.
Because 6 votes are required to move any action forward to the city council. However, this item will advance to city council for their consideration.
I trust Commissioner Dish to relay in more detail. Okay, we move on to item 8B for regular business. The petition, which includes proposed amendments. Oh, yes. Welcome back, Commissioner Lee. Proposed amendments to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.20, landscaping, screening, and buffers to amend the requirements for conflicting land use buffers and reorganize for improved consistency. So we'll start with staff report. Ms. DeLeo.
All right, thank you. As mentioned, these are amendments to Chapter 55, Section 520, landscaping, screening, and buffers. There we go. I am purposely going to make this presentation out of numerical order in the ordinance and the staff report, which follows the numerical order. First, I'm going to talk about Section 520.4, conflicting land use buffers, current title. Then 520.3, vehicular use area, landscaping and screening, and finally 520.6, refuse and recycling container screening. We start with Section 520.4, conflicting land use buffers. They are required in 5 cases, and there's a lot going on this slide, and it's to really engage your brain and also make sure you pay attention to me. There are the applicability requirements for a conflicting land use buffer, which we sometimes call a club, C-L-U-B. They are required when you have a vehicular use area adjacent to a public park or land principally used or zoned for residential purposes. They are also required when you have a refuse recycling container adjacent to the same. They are required for the portion of a parcel zoned O, RE, ORL, any of the Cs or any of the Ms abutting the same public park or parcel principally used or zoned for residential. They are required, fourth, for the portion of a parcel zoned R3 or R4, which are multifamily zoning districts, when they are adjacent to land used or zoned for residential purposes. And finally, they're required in the TC1 or any of the TC districts when you abut a residential zoning district or the PL district. And conceptually, what we're doing is this. For 1 and 2, no real changes. We are just moving those. Circled in red, this is what we're actually talking about and changing. We are talking about eliminating the requirement for a conflicting land use buffer when abutting land principally used for residential. The requirement to have a buffer from land that is zoned for residential purposes remains. And we are talking about eliminating the requirement to buffer a parcel zoned R3 or R4 from land that is zoned or used for residential purposes. The fifth, when TC1 zoning abuts residential zoning or PL, that is being combined with number 3. So the changes look like, I didn't mean that. So in terms of club applicability, I mentioned one of the requirements is a club be provided for most of the mixed-use zoning districts and some of the non-residential special purpose ones when you are abutting a park or land used or zoned for residential. This makes it very dependent on outside variables. A project in a commercial district might introduce mixed uses, residential on the second or third floor or something like that, switch over to adaptive reuse. that means that the parcels next to it automatically become non-conforming because they did not provide a conflicting land use buffer. Similar, it goes both ways, opposite. It also requires mixed-use developments to be buffered from mixed-use developments. I think for the most part, if you go with percentages, you might have commercial retail on the first floor. In the ideal scenario, a floor of commercial, 1 or 2 floors of office, and then upper stories of residential in the ideal classic mixed-use model. But in terms of percentages, that's principally used residential. You'd have all your mixed-use buildings up and down your corridors buffered from each other. And also when we are currently requiring a buffer between R3 and R4, that means that you require a buffer between identical uses. And a single lot in that R4 district, which around the campus area, the whole neighborhoods are zoned R4C. They sometimes get redeveloped, and each one of them would need to provide a conflicting land use buffer. And in that case, that buffer would be 30 feet wide, 30 feet minimum, because 15 feet on one parcel, 15 feet on another. And that seems to diminish the neighborhood character rather than actually promote it. I think that maybe the intentions were good, but the way this is written, it seems that there was a desire to prioritize one land use, perhaps single family, and buffer that from multifamily, but the way it is written, the way it is applied, the way it is used, we are just buffering all the same from all the same. So here is the key for moving, deleting, and combining. The moving things are in gray, the deleting things are struck out, and the combining things are circled. In terms of combining, we are taking 3 and 5, and we have combined them into and since there's one left, I'm not going to number 1. So we are just making section 520.4 say a conflicting land use buffer is required where a parcel or portion thereof in a mixed-use, special purpose, or non-residential zoning district abuts a public park or a parcel in a residential zoning district. And then the same exact conflicting land use buffer standards apply, the same width, the same planting requirements, the same screening. The one thing we did, though, is change the title. It's not really a conflicting land use buffer anymore. It's a conflicting district buffer. So we changed the heading there. And then, like I mentioned, we're doing it out of order. Then remember the parts that we said we were moving. So in section 520.3, which is currently vehicular use area, landscaping, and screening, this will become vehicular use area, screening, landscaping, and buffering, adding the mention of buffering, and then changing the order so it follows the actual order of the standards. It currently has a section A, right-of-way screening, no changes there. Section B is the interior landscape islands. We've added headings and reordered this section, but no changes there. And then we've added C, conflicting use buffer, and no changes from the club requirements except for the new place, the new home for them. Same width, same screening, planting materials, and same screening. And then continuing the theme in section 520.6, I think there's a typo at the top of the slide. Refuse recycling container screening, same, added the mention of buffering in the title. The A component does not change. It is right-of-way screening. We've added a section B for conflicting use buffer. These have some slight changes from the club standards, specifically to be consistent with the right-of-way screening. A hedge or landform berm are not permitted. The only screening you can do is the fence, the solid fence or wall. Otherwise, it's the same. It's the same stuff. And so, I am happy to answer any follow-up questions or clarification questions. But this concludes my presentation, and staff recommend approval.
Thank you. Now I'll open up the public hearing. This is an opportunity for persons to speak up to 3 minutes about the proposed UDC amendments. We'll first call on individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants. To speak during the public hearing remotely, press star 9 if listening by phone, and use the raise hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers who have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone or by name if available, accessing through the web link. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so we may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present who would like to speak at this time?
You push the button on it.
I can learn how to do that. Thank you, Mr. Leonard. As I was saying, Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. I wasn't going to speak on this one, but I'm, pardon the pun, I'm conflicted about this particular change. I really get Mr. Leo's point that in residential districts where we're looking at redeveloping for higher density in the R4 districts around campus and near downtown, kind of a 30-foot buffer total doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of an anachronism. But I disagree with their statement that we're currently buffering all the same from all the same. This is just based on my personal experience up in the Huron Highlands neighborhood, up on Pontiac Trail. This neighborhood is, small single-family ranches, mostly working class. And in 2017, it was faced with the cottages at Barton Green student housing development, the most hated student housing development in town, not just by the neighbors, but by its own residents. If you don't believe me, check the Google, Yelp, and other reviews. And my neighbors on Skydale, former neighbors, I no longer live there, have to deal with the floodlights, the noise, the partying, the garbage. And if they didn't have that conflicting land use buffer, and the developer had chosen to build right up against their backyards, I just feel real bad for them. I guess my point is that we're not always buffering all the same from all the same. These are two very different R4A. Actually, the Huron Highlands, it was single family, but we're not talking about rich people. And the one is R4A. This planning commission rejected this proposal by a 7-2 vote back in 2018. City council rejected it unanimously. They ended up suing the city, and the city ended up settling with them on very favorable terms to the developer. So it got built, and I think it's a net negative for the city and for the neighborhood next to it, and for its own residents. Terrible management. Anyway, this is getting off the subject. I guess I don't oppose this particular change, but I think we should acknowledge that it's a little bit more complex than maybe staff presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there anyone that would like to address the commission remotely?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay. With that, I'll close the public hearing and read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the amendments to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.20.3, Vehicular Use Area Landscaping and Screening, Section 5.20.4, Conflicting Land Use Buffers, and Section 5.20.6, Refuse Recycling Container Screening, to amend the applicability and conflicting land use buffers and reorganize the section for improved consistency. Moved by Commissioner White, seconded by Commissioner Dish. Discussion. Commissioner Dish.
I would like to follow up on Mr. Garber's statement and just ask if I am misunderstanding something, but the case that you described is a multifamily development up against an area that's zoned residential. So a club would be required?
Today, a club is required.
If we make
Because
this-
I believe if that development is zoned R3 or R4, and I understand it is R4A, then it seems to abut, if I understand correctly, it seems to abut R1 something, but R, then that development should have, I assume it does have, a conflicting land use buffer.
And if we make the change, it still would have to have.
It would not.
It would not have to have.
R would not have to buffer from R.
R would not have to buffer from R. Okay.
In that case, line 4, if you will, from the presentation, I can pull it up. Yeah. In order, what it says now is the portion of a parcel zoned R3 or R4 adjacent to a parcel principally used or zoned for residential purposes, all encompassing. So that means that yes, a multifamily would need to provide a conflicting land use buffer from a single family. But also, a multifamily would need to provide a conflicting land use buffer adjacent to multifamily. So we have proposed to eliminate that requirement entirely and not require residential to buffer from residential. It could be discussed, there could be changed so that it'd be more clear that multifamily must buffer from single family zoning, but that's not what it says right now. It's all encompassing and all inclusive. And we are proposing that we do not require residential to buffer from residential.
So could I ask the commission to deliberate for a moment on the implications of moving forward with the proposed change or restoring a buffer between single family and multifamily in light of our density goals and other things?
Commissioner Hammerschmidt?
I'll try to be quick because I don't like that idea for reasons that you're probably going to articulate better than me, but I don't like the idea of requiring a buffer between single family and multifamily. A, I'm hoping that single family zoning we can sort out through the comp plan, but B, I feel like that's a really extreme example, and that sucks that, you know, they're having these issues, but I feel like it causes a lot of potential equity issues and exclusionary issues, saying like we don't want single family homes to be too close to multifamily. I just feel like it sends the opposite message from what we're trying to do just as a city. There you go.
You are correct. I was going to say the same thing, especially since our goal is to, and council's goal is to enable the missing middle in our residential districts. If I understand this correctly, if we put a conflicting land use buffer between R3 and R4, but we permit those in all the R districts, now we've put in this 15-foot on both sides in order to protect single-family homes. And yeah, I would not be in favor of that.
I might just also add it to the lot size. While there might be contiguous lots assembled for larger developments, a lot of these conditions are smaller lots, and we're taking up a lot of buildable footprint when applying this. So even in those multifamily, requiring it in a large parcel may be negligible. But when we look at our city as a whole, requiring a 15-foot buffer on our smaller parcels, many of our multifamily parcels are already non-conforming to our current lot size standards. It becomes very difficult to create a feasible footprint. within. So further restricts our ability to create multifamily development. And instead, we see our multifamily turn into single family. But as I would understand it, if we looked at it, just to kind of maybe finish this thought, a single family home can be built on a multifamily parcel. And if we made sure the club buffered a multifamily into a single family, that single family on a multifamily parcel would still need to build a club, correct? So, because it's not by use, it's still just by zoning. So even so we could end up with just single family because we're going to get a McMansion because it's about square footage more than units sometimes. And who can afford to create that landscape buffer instead of getting enough units on the site. So I would not support. Also, we still have setbacks. So we're not going lot to lot with some of these buildings. Anyone else? Other comments? Okay, I have one more. Sorry, maybe I'm just... Public park versus zone PL. I believe in the final edits, we're just down to public park, and zone PL parcel is no longer part of any of the language within everything that we've seen. Can staff speak to why we're leaning towards public parks as the language instead of PL?
Yes, I can. Right now, only one of the applicability standards, the fifth one where it says portion of a parcel zone TC abutting residential zone, or the PL. Again, I think this is actually, and then the other four, just talk about public park. I think PL is too broad, too encompassing. We use the PL district for any publicly owned land, and 99% of it would be owned by the City of Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan, or the Ann Arbor Public Schools. And I don't think that we are intending, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I don't think we're intending to require a buffer, floating land use buffer adjacent to schools or to the land owned by the University of Michigan. I think, or even maybe another City of Ann Arbor facility. The other four applicability requirements specifically say public park, and I went with I'm proposing to be consistent with those. Obviously could be amended, but that is my rationale behind. I felt that the PL district was actually a little bit too broad. You could have a lot of uses within, a lot of distinct and different uses within that zoning category.
Is there any like hardship to be able to figure out if it's a public park? And maybe more specifically, I think about like PUDs that often like donate portions of land. Those get rezoned, like to PL, and do those become public park, or like what is a public park versus the greenway or something else? Do those all fall under public park? Do we have an official definition of it?
The unofficial official definition is if it shows up in the PROS, the Parks Restoration Open Space Plan. There is a official list of city parks. Parks and natural areas are included, but that is our definition of a park.
Okay. So staff has a document to...
Yes.
Okay. Guide petitioners. That's all. Everyone good? Ready for a vote?
Commissioner Salve,
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
Councilmember Dish,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Weiss.
Yes.
That motion carries.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 8C, petition 2195 East Ellsworth, Lockwood Planned Unit Development PUD text amendment proposal to adjust the east side setback by 4 feet from 144 feet to 140 feet, and the south side setback from 4 feet to 68 by 4 feet from 68 feet to 64 feet. No new construction is proposed. We will start with a petitioner presentation of up to 10 minutes.
Sorry, the petitioner is online with the last four numbers of their it's 0. Oh, now it says Mark Lockwood. Sorry, it was just the phone number before.
They've been promoted to panelists.
Mr. Lockwood, are you there?
He was on.
I just saw them rejoin as panelists.
Mr. Lockwood, you can unmute yourself and address the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay there. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for the time this evening. Purpose of our request or petition here today is to essentially clean up a conflict between the approved site plan for the planned unit development on Ellsworth with the text of the planned unit development as approved previously. Essentially, the setback measurement was done from the midpoint of the building on the front and side wings. And upon a revision survey or construction progress survey, we realized that the nearest points of the building were about between 1.5 feet and 2.5 feet, depending on the corner, closer to the setback as written. And that's really the approved site plan was measured and translated to the text about 2.5 feet off. And so we're looking to clean up that conflict between the approved site plan and the text of the PUD. And that is what we're presenting today.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to staff presentation.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. So on your screen, I'll go through. You see some images. I apologize. Obviously, the first one's pretty well zoomed out, but that shows the ALTA survey. How this was kind of discovered is that the petitioner was doing an ALTA survey during construction. So then obviously that survey revealed that that foundation is as Mr. Lockwood said, about 1.5 feet or so over. On the two corners there'd be the southeast corner and just the south edge of it along the front area there. So you can see here on the zoomed in image, obviously the yellow areas are the ones that are kind of just over that setback line. This, obviously much farther zoomed out, shows how it would comply with the proposed setbacks, is how we're modifying. If you can see the yellow area here, those setbacks move back. It's about 4 feet there, so you can see it's well within that setback there, within the front and within the side area here. And this is due, we try to, when we're initially doing the planning, or the PUDs, as you all know, they have their own setbacks defined specifically in there. We try to give a little bit of wiggle room when we're building those because things like this could happen. But unfortunately, this is, again, something that obviously staff can't change because it's in the zoning of the project. This will ultimately have to go to City Council for final approval. So we did, while it's not, we've given 4 feet there, it's really only about 2 feet over. It's unlikely to change again because the foundation is set. If you see if you've been out there lately or you see the aerial photo, it's not going anywhere now. But we still, just in case, we enabled that little bit. So that's really basically what it is. There's no other change to the land use, no change to parking, any other thing within the project as that was originally approved back in, I believe it was 2020. Yes. So that's basically it. I'm here for any questions, and staff is recommending approval.
Thank you. Now I'll open up to a public hearing. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about proposed text amendment at 2195 East Ellsworth. We will first call on individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants. To speak during the public hearing remotely, press *9 if listening by phone and use the raise hand feature if viewing through the web link. Phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers who have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of the phone number or by name if available for those accessing through the web link. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so we may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time? Please come forward.
Yes, my name is Richard D. Hart, and I live at 2250 East Ellsworth Road, which is directly across the street from this building. I've lived at my home for as far back as 1959, so I've kind of seen how all of this has developed. Several years ago, when Lockwood was being proposed, the residents surrounding the project were asked for input. After looking at the preliminary site plan, I suggested to move the building back about 50 feet and keep as many of the trees as possible. Obviously, none of that happened. In essence, the property was erased of everything. It turned into a hilly landscape, into a flat rectangle. I guess I have several questions. One is, who is accountable for the mistake in the location? Second, why didn't the city inspection process catch the mistake before it was too late to fix it? And I guess, what is the point in having setback rules if they aren't going to be followed? And what is the compensation for the adjacent property owners, because a variance from the initial proposal was not put out there, and that didn't happen, and it appears that this is going to happen anyway, because I don't think they're going to move the building. But as an adjacent property owner, I'll be basically living with this mistake for as long as I live in my home. And if you've been out to that site, that building is right up in your face. It's 3 stories high, and it's huge. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak?
There's one caller virtually.
Hold on, we have
Oh,
more.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Commissioner Salve, Ken Garber. Yeah, so I don't really have an opinion on the setback adjustment. I think you, as Mr. DeHart said, you pretty much have to grant it. I agree with him that it's unfortunate and that there should be some accountability. But I want to, since we have Mr. Lockwood here, if I were sitting in your chair, I would have a question, unrelated. Lockwood committed to an all-electric building with the exception of the commercial kitchen. Actually, small correction, the building was approved in February 2021, and a few days before City Council approved it, Steve Gabris, Vice President of Development, confirmed that in a letter to Mr. Kowalski that Lockwood's committed to doing an all-electric heat. So this wasn't written into the supplemental regulations, and I'm just curious, how's that going? And what kind of HVAC system is being put in, because the building is pretty far along. Are we talking about air source VRF, individual unit heat pumps, geothermal perhaps? Maybe one of you shares my curiosity and will take advantage of Mr. Lockwood's presence online to ask the question. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you again for your indulgence.
Thank you. Anyone else in the chambers?
Can I make a comment to that?
I mean, you do have, I don't know, you still have a minute left in your time from what I saw. Is that?
It's, I think, maybe up to the discretion of the chair, but when you step away from the podium and relinquish your time, your public comment period, in my opinion, would be over, but it's could be at your discretion, Madam Chair.
I just simply want to state an
I'll let you
observation.
yield. Sir.
And that is that the natural gas pipeline goes right in front of my house, just inside the right-of-way easement. And I do know that they did an excavation across the road and hooked that building into the natural gas pipeline.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who wishes to speak? All right, is there anyone who would like to address the commission remotely?
There's one hand raised. Adam Yaskevich, you have permission to speak.
Hi, this is Adam Juskevich, 1430 Las Vegas Drive. These setbacks are already quite deep, such that a few feet barely registers as a rounding error, or in the parlance of our times, a nothing burger. I find the idea that this would be objectionable to be risible. Thank you.
There are no other hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Closing public comment. I will read the motion. Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve Lockwood of Ann Arbor development of 2195 East Ellsworth planned unit development PUD zoning text amendment. Moved by Commissioner Hammerschmidt, seconded by Commissioner Lee. We are now in discussion. Commissioner Dish.
So I would like to ask the questions, so the mistake occurred because the site plan was improperly translated into the text of the PUD? That's what I heard said. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know exactly. We have a set of site plans that we review initially that have a number on it. And then that number, like I said, we give a little bit of wiggle room versus what they propose. We're not intimately involved with the surveying process and all that, of course, of laying it out. So we build our number of setback that we get in the PUD regulations based on the site plan that they present at that time. So I'm not the survey. I don't know we wouldn't have gone out there and surveyed it ourselves. The city does not do that. So I think during their process of financing and whatnot, they need to update their Alta survey. So that's how it was discovered. So I don't know if the initial survey was just off or if, like I said, the setbacks that are in the PUD regulations are not exactly based on a number. We gave a range and it just happened to fall but not enough of a range, like only a foot. And it just fell outside of that range. So I don't know whether the initial survey was off. The setbacks, again, it's not like we said an exact number in there. So translating the survey to the setbacks it's not really a direct correlation initially.
Okay, so you're saying that the statement that I think I heard, which was that the approved site plan was translated into the text of the PUD incorrectly, is not a correct description of what happened?
No, because the approved site plan fits within the approved PUD regulations. So yes, right, I don't know exactly what was meant by, but I think that was, might have been a little bit.
Did I mishear or did?
You can ask him.
Okay.
So we do still have Mr. Lockwood on the line, and I think what Planner Kowalski was saying during his initial presentation is that there are allowances made for certain types of technical discrepancies that may happen throughout later surveying, but that this nevertheless did move yet outside of that wiggle room that was initially allowed for. But perhaps the petitioner can assist in this question. Mr. Lockwood, would you mind?
Sure. I think that's an accurate description. I think that my understanding, and this may be more of a question for our civil engineering team, is that the measurements provided on the site plan that was approved based on the initial survey were not dimensioned from the nearest point of the building, and the building appears to be square to Ellsworth Road in just on a visual review, but it's actually offset by across the span of the building by about 1.5 feet, and that's my understanding of where the discrepancy came into play. And then when we went through the process of having an interim survey done by our as in accordance with our lender, which is the state of Michigan, we discovered that issue that the building, as I understand it on the approved site plan, was slightly outside of the setbacks prescribed in the PUD. And at that point, we initiated the process of making sure that everything matched up.
Okay, so I think the question that concerned the resident concerns then the measurements. Who did the measurements that were off? In other words, Mr. Lockwood, I'm sorry, I should be more clear. You're saying that the measurements were done incorrectly, that they were, whatever your reference point was, it actually set the building slightly off from where it was meant to be. Who would have been responsible for those measurements, I think, is the question that the resident would like to know.
Sure. That would be the surveyor and civil engineer who laid out the site plan. So I think the measurement was from the middle of the building and not the nearest corner, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and the plan, I can verify when you look at the original approved plan, it scales correctly to those dimensions based on that survey that was provided at that time. Mm-hmm. So again, I think it was possibly a surveying area of where they centered that, is we're kind of, and I know Mr. Lockwood and I were trying to talk the survey talk, but again, that's where that error came in. And then when they resurveyed it, I believe they probably used a slightly different centering point. I mean, we're not talking about a lot on a big site here, but I did go back to scale the plan and say, well, okay, well, the site plan, was that really, because obviously you can scale of our site plans, was that exactly was the site plan number off, just an error on the thing? But it scales correctly on that based on the survey that was submitted, and that site plan was built upon that survey. And then we made the setbacks with a little bit of wiggle room upon that site plan that was based on the survey that was submitted. So that's kind of a convoluted way. So I guess we don't know exactly where. Ultimately, I would believe it would be the civil engineer or the surveyor that would have to define exactly where that error occurred and what they were basing their measurements upon.
Yeah, and I don't think we actually need to do a whole forensic analysis, but there was, I wanted to just make sure that there wasn't an implication that the city was at fault. And in the end, we are talking about a foot or two. So it doesn't seem all that distressing. Then I would like to, again, give voice to another resident's question, which is, so I wonder, Mr. Lockwood, if you could tell us how you are actually going to be heating the building. Were you unable to fulfill your intention to make it all electric heating, or were you?
So to address that right on, the building is primarily heated via a high efficiency natural gas boiler system, which is, I think that what was discussed at the time of approval is that we would submit a waiver to the design standards of Michigan State Housing Development Authority, which in their design standards, at the time at least, mandated that gas and hot water be supplied via natural gas heat, and that waiver request was submitted and was not approved.
Are you good, Commissioner Dish? Okay. Anybody else? I have procedural questions. As I understand PUD, if it's not written in the PUD, it falls back to our base UDC text, correct?
Well, for what kind of item?
So because we removed planned projects and created language about averaging a front setback, just as part of our base UDC, and our base UDC also has minimum or maximum setbacks. Mm-hmm. I'm curious why that part of our UDC that allows that setback averaging didn't apply to this project.
Oh, I think we would have to probably specifically, because we wrote, I see what you're, like if it's excluded, you're saying it would, if we don't write it in there, then it's automatic. but we addressed the setbacks specifically here. I think it'd be different if we didn't address the setbacks, then maybe that would kick in that qualifications. But we do address the setbacks here, and we don't allow for averaging specifically in these PUD. So I think if we weren't noting a setback specifically, here's the range, then it would fall back to that underlying zoning district, the consideration
That averaging sort of thing,
we
or
lay
it would-
out the setback specifically
As like-
within this proposal.
Okay, so when a PUD outlines a setback, it's a firm number.
Yes,
It doesn't adopt the
Yeah,
same
correct.
flexibility as the rest of our
Exactly, because
UDC.
That we looked, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Because again, I looked not to avoid coming to a board, but it was a relatively minor
Mm-hmm.
issue, and rather than driving, this project, affordable housing project, through these rings again, but there's simply no way, correct,
Yeah.
we exhausted that. It's a zoning, it's set in there, it has to be by council, and there's no other way to like if we would have written that in there initially, that
Right.
might have been a good idea. And now we've learned from this as well as giving maybe a little bit of extra flexibility within our zone. Like I said, I thought I built in a little
Yep.
bit, but there may be some ways of looking at that kind of thing in the future to give the planning commission or staff, a little bit of not leeway, judgment maybe at that,
Yeah.
when things like that fall into play.
That goes to my second question is, if this was a by right project, let's just say it was approved and met all the standards, would this, and it had, other than the variance, would this have been an administrative amendment if this was a by right project instead of coming back through?
No, I think so, because we've got that scale now. I'd have to pull up the code. It's shifting, it would be adjusting the setback slightly. It would at least be I think it would just be administrative. I'll have to pull up the code it wouldn't, if it still fell within the approved, like the required setbacks, then it wouldn't have to go all the way back to council. I know that. So but I'd have to look at the code really quickly to see whether it'd be administrative or planning commission, but.
To like re-review the site plan at planning commission?
Exactly, because it would be a minor change, and we built in
Right.
some things with our last revisions
Yeah.
to allow buildings to shift slightly for exactly this reason of a by right project. If it comes in a foot and a half over, we don't have to go through all
Yeah.
so we did build that in, but again, Mr. Leonard's looking that up, but
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I'm curious, I guess,
Yeah.
as you're digging, I'll explain like the burden of the PUD, the burden or benefit of the PUD, and if those actually balance out or not, relative to what we're asking for in a public benefit. Like, I know we have affordable housing in this. We're not getting the electrification, unfortunately. But going through this entire process again, like PUD does not have a clear second step. And right now we have I'm really excited for that comp plan, because what we see is pushing petitioners into PUDs because the discomfort of zoning. And then not only is there the hurdle of the PUD, there's the continued hurdle of a PUD. So that's what I'm like, what would this look like if we were actually could rezone things or site plan, this is where TC1 or any other progressive rezoning will help more by right projects hit our goals. So Commissioner Manager Leonard.
To your question,
You have the first, yeah.
This would fall under a revision. It would likely fall under the revision of moving a building placement either more or less than 10 feet. In this case, I think it would be less than 10 feet if I'm understanding that. So that would be a site plan for planning manager approval. That would not require, but because, as you said, the PUD, when the PUD is used to specify, we recently had another example of this with Beekman on Broadway, where yes, the more that a PUD constrains that project at the outset, the less flexibility it's going to have going forward.
So this is, if it was just to kind of play out the whole scenario, if this was by right, it would be planning manager review versus a planning commission, first reading, second reading, city council, 3 public hearings.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Two public hearings.
2 public hearings, but 3 meetings. Okay. I think that's it. I mean, as I have the mic, it's really disappointing not to see a building this size, especially on a clear and blank slate, being able to capture a lot more renewable resources to make this all electric. It is possible, and technology has really moved forward. And I would love to see the denial reasoning of the housing not allowing disconnection from gas. So that's added to our conversation about electrification. Do you have any other comments? All right, we'll move to a vote.
On the motion as presented, Commissioner Sauvé.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Yes.
Councilmember Dish.
Yes.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner Weiss.
Yes.
That motion carries.
Thank you. All right, we move to item 8D, petition 3945 through 3957, South State Site Plan and Special Exception Use, a proposal to reduce the size of the existing building at 3949 to 3957 South State by 1,384 square feet and to add a drive-through lane along the rear of the building. We will start with petitioner presentation of up to 10 minutes.
It's Architecture tonight, representing the owners. We'd like to ask for a postponement tonight for several reasons. Number one, several members of our team aren't available tonight, so we don't have our civil engineers or our traffic consultant with us. Number two, because of an error in the process, the postcards that were mailed out for the public hearing that contained an image of Beekman on Broadway on the postcard instead of our project. And number three, we'd like to make a presentation before the full board. So in light of our request for the postponement, I could certainly go ahead with my presentation, or we could hold off, whichever you prefer.
I say proceed for conversation if you want any early feedback.
All right, so Matt, if you're going to drive those slides, the first slide is a general area plan, kind of showing the overall context of the site. You'll see probably the biggest reference there is the Costco off to the left. This is an area on the fringe of the city where it borders the Pittsfield Township. My sense is that there's an agreement between the township and the city that the city will no longer be gobbling up the township, so these boundaries are likely to stay the way they are for the foreseeable future. You can see the circle around the existing building, which has been built in, my client's been unable to lease it for about 5 years now. It's right behind the Jimmy John's. People will probably know the Jimmy John's because you can see that when you drive up and down the street. Next slide.
Sorry, all right, let me do this. Sorry, it's spinning. Okay, sorry.
So this is just the existing site plan. It shows the way the buildings are constructed and laid out on the site, with an area that's highlighted where the proposed change would be. Next slide. This is a slide that shows the removal of about 8 feet of the north side of the building. And by removing that 8 feet of the existing building, that would facilitate putting a lane through the north side of the building from the east side of the parking lot to the middle of the parking lot. Next slide. Here's an enlargement of the proposed new footprint. We're showing the stacking for about a dozen cars or vehicles as they loop their way around the north side of the building, which is far more than any time that I've ever been there. Even at lunchtime at Jimmy John's, I don't get that much stacking at the Jimmy John's because it's a much shallower turn. I understand that there are many days that the Jimmy John's doesn't even have indoor seating because they can't find the staff. So they're relegated to, most of the time, having drive-through service only. You'll see here on this site plan, we're putting in electric vehicle charging stations, which there are currently none on the site, but we would be adding those both at the east and the west ends of the modified building. Okay. Some 2D elevations with the 8 feet excised off the north. Not proposing any changes to the south. Next should be some visual representations of the south side and the two ends. You can see in those two ends there's a construction joint at about the place where we would be removing that northern side of the building. Matt, I believe the rest of them are just the civil engineering submission for the project.
Yep, okay.
So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move to staff presentation. Mr. Qualter.
Again, as Mr. Moore said, the petition here before you, it's a site plan as well as a special exception use. They also do require a landscape modification. That's something that was recently, it used to be a variance request, but one of your changes within the last year or so moved it to a landscape modification. That's due to, and it's fully supported by all staff, and they have existing trees in the, just out of the right-of-way at the front of the site, in front of Jimmy John's, but this is all one site, so we're looking at everything. But those trees can't be placed in the right-of-way as street trees because of the distance, the width, and the utility line running through there. So there is a landscape modification that would also be requested with this, a special exception use, obviously for approval of the drive-through, and it is a site plan for planning, I could say city council approval, but it should be planning commission approval. Oh yeah, sorry, we have that on here. And so really, again, the main concerns, we looked at this, they did submit an updated traffic study with this, a traffic impact. Obviously, the nature of the site was changing, the use. That back building was not obviously designed for a drive-through, so they had to do a new study to look at that. Our traffic engineer did examine that, couple of comments back and forth. Really, the only concerns that she ended up with was just increasing the visibility striping. You can see actually on the right picture here, the top right picture, they do have, the site was done with porous pavers, which seem to be working very well. And that's a good thing. We've had some problems with other sites, but so you can see that the striping there is just delineated by different colored of pavers, but our transportation engineer recommended that obviously that be painted with some high visibility striping, as well as increased signage for both of the drive-through exits. That will be, one will be the drive-through entrance for the Jimmy John's, and they exit around the front, and then this one would be exiting around towards the closest side of State Street that you're looking at. So increased signage in there and increased pedestrian crossings, or rather the visibility of those. And that was her concerns regarding the access to the site. There are no vehicular concerns regarding access. And get a landscape modification. They are installing EV spaces, as you saw Mr. Moore pointed out. Those were not required at the original time of approval for the Jimmy John's business in the front. And again, there's a very slight increase to the impervious surface on the site, but however, they obviously did submit revised calculations for that, and the system they have in place is more than adequate to detain for that extra area. And other than that, there's no changes. There's no other required landscaping or other elements that are being removed on the site. And obviously, this is adjacent to another commercial or, well, it's a hotel as well as the research district there, so no buffering would be required along the back of the building anyway. And that concludes our presentation. Staff was recommending approval of the special exception use, landscape modification, and the site plan. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we move on to public hearing. So this is an opportunity for persons to speak up to 3 minutes about the proposed project at 3945 to 3957 South State. We will first call on individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants. Please, to speak during this public hearing remotely, press star 9 if listening by phone, or use the raise hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers who have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by name, if available, through accessing the web link. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds. We may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time?
Thank you, Commissioner Salve. I'm getting my Toastmasters attendance score up tonight. Ken Garber again. And As I see it here, the petitioner basically wants to rip away 3 sides of a brand-new building, removing a quarter of it, 1,384 square feet, and then replace it with pavement. Not just any pavement, pavement for idling vehicles. Is this a public benefit worth a special exception use grant by this body? Yeah, I love how the site plan that you just saw shows 13 vehicles waiting in line. I think that's probably an unfortunate visual, but it's kind of a nightmare scenario for me. I agree with Mr. Yaskevich, who called in earlier about the undesirability of any drive-through going forward in the city. Yes, State and Ellsworth is probably the most car-centric part of Ann Arbor. But do we have to make it even more so? More idling cars, more exhaust fumes, more emissions? This building is already assigned 22 parking spaces. I think the petitioner can live with that. Back in April, you rejected the U of M Credit Union's request for a special exception use for its Plymouth Road drive-through quite properly. I spoke against that drive-through. Let's be consistent and reject this plan as well. I know in the great scheme of things, we've got wars, gun violence, racism, climate change. This special exception use is not such a big deal. I recognize that, but it's something that we can control. It's one minor atrocity we can reject. So I urge you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else present would like to speak? Ms. Kelly, do we have anyone calling in remotely?
There is one speaker, Madam Chair. Adam Yaskevich, you have permission to address the commission.
Hi, Adam Yaskevich again, 1430 Las Vegas Drive. As I mentioned earlier, in a more general sense, I am opposed to any new drive-thrus in Ann Arbor. But this is about the specific proposal before you tonight. I might be becoming the Ken Garber of drive-thrus, but yet again we have a petitioner bringing forward a proposal to build yet another new drive-thru. As this is a special exception use, it is up to the petitioner to show you why you should approve this drive-thru tonight. What is so special about it? Why should they be given a special exception? Looking at the site plans, I'm not seeing it. It's just another suburban-style drive-thru like all the rest of them. If we're serious about our goals as a city, we need to do better. We are in a climate crisis. We have pledged to cut vehicle miles traveled in half, A20. We are in a traffic violence crisis. We have pledged to eliminate KSI crashes, Vision Zero. We won't get there if we keep building car-centric developments like this. We won't get there if we don't get serious about transforming our stroads into livable spaces usable by people with all modes of transportation. Yes, the existing site is already car-centric, to be fair, but there's no reason to make it worse. Another drive-through does not get us there. You have the discretion to decide whether or not to allow drive-thrus. Please deny the special exception use for this drive-through. Thank you.
There are no other hands raised at this time.
Thank you. We'll close the public hearing, and I will read both motions together. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission, after hearing all interested persons and reviewing all relevant information, finds the petition to substantially meet the standards of Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.29.5, Special Exceptions, approves the 3949 to 3957 South State Street special exception use for a drive-through facility. This approval is based on the following findings. 1, it will be consistent with the general objectives of the city comprehensive plan of commercial uses in the area. And 2, the proposed use will not adversely impact traffic, pedestrians, bicyclists, circulation, or road intersections based on the location. The proposed use is consistent with other surrounding uses' traffic impact. In motion number 2, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby approves the 3949 to 3957 South State Street site plan, including a landscape modification that allows existing trees just outside the right-of-way to be counted as required street trees. Moved by Commissioner White, seconded by Commissioner Dish. Discussion. Commissioner Leach.
So to the petitioner, I just want to check a couple things. When you, in this proposal, you are proposing to deconstruct the building that sits behind the Jimmy John's that's currently unoccupied, or are you, like, can you just explain that? I looked at the site plan and I looked at the renderings, but I just wanted a little more clarity.
Yeah, so the whole building isn't being deconstructed. Just the northern 8 feet of the building would be removed.
Okay.
So the temporary supports would be put in place to maintain the balance of the roof structure, and then that northern 8 feet would be deconstructed, and then a new northern bearing wall would be built.
Okay.
So not the whole thing is being deconstructed, just that 8 feet. And that's so that rather than having a vacant building there, we could lease the building. And certainly, if we postpone tonight, I can bring at the next hearing the leasing agent who's been trying to lease it for the last 5 years. And he can tell you that they've had pharmacies and financial institutions and bakeries and coffee shops who would all lease there if they had a drive-through, but no one will lease there without it.
Okay. And then the egress and, the movement of cars, is that primarily going to come in through State, or is it also on Ellsworth?
No, the only entrance to the property is on State.
Okay. So
I'm
then,
proposing to change that.
okay, so then that is sitting in that traffic circle. So maybe to staff, in the traffic analysis, that traffic circle is like the #1 accident spot in southeastern Michigan now. So like, how did that come into this conversation? Because potentially there'll be more commerce there, which will be pushing people into that site, both egress and, trying to get in and out of the space. And I know coming from Costco, people don't know what a yield sign means. So as you make that Michigan left onto State, people are trying to get over so that they can get into the far right lane, so that they can get on 94, so that they can exit the city. So I'm just surprised that the only feedback we got from traffic was striping to make it easier for car storage.
So I did try to look, I looked pretty detailed in the traffic study, but that's one thing I didn't notice today was whether or not it took into account that the traffic within the roundabout. I can't answer that right now. I can open the file and see if I can get that answer right now, but I know, again, so if it is postponed, I can come back for sure and get that answer for you and get that answered if I can't find it right now.
And I can certainly tell you that I can have the traffic engineer here. That traffic engineer works just west of that roundabout, and so I'm sure he's intimately familiar with the functionality and the trip generation that the business would require.
Yeah, there's a lot of trip generation. I mean, there's just a lot of cars that are, moving through that intersection all of the time, it seems. So did I hear you correctly saying that as best, and this has been a 5 year, so 5 years, you've built it, you haven't been able to lease it, and it is your belief that the only way that you would be able to lease it is by having a drive-through?
Yeah, that is the belief of the leasing agent who's been trying to lease it for the past 5 years. He could have leased it several times over if it had had the drive-through.
And so then, since it's a special exception use, what is the exception here? Like, why? Is it because, well, I don't want to give you answers. I'd like to hear what your answers are for.
Well, I think certainly it's in the best interest of the city not to have vacant, disused buildings. It's better to have viable businesses and better tax revenue and just a better overall affect of the city rather than having vacant, empty buildings.
Okay.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
I have a few questions. Some of them might be better answered when the whole team is here if we postpone, but one question I had, I noticed that there seem to be 3 distinct units, I guess, like within that building. That's what it looked like from the map. Is it more than one?
So it was built, the shell was built with 3 entrance doors along that south face in anticipation that it could have been 3 different tenancies. But whichever whenever there's a tenant that signs a lease, that can be reconfigured. Those doors don't necessarily have to stay where they are.
So the-
at least by a single, they would take out 2 doors, or they may take out the middle door and keep each end. It's flexible.
But the drive-through would, if there were 3, the drive-through would only service one of those.
The drive-through only would service, the window for the drive-through would be at the western end of the building. So
Okay, so the one
closest to the
closest.
Jimmy John's, yeah.
Okay,
And we don't know that there'll ever be 13 cars in a row. We just wanted to produce a document that was evidence that there's plenty of room to stack without interfering with the traffic in the parking aisles.
okay.
And I'll point out that cars for about a decade now, even if they're not electric, they don't idle, they stop. And they don't produce fumes while you're waiting.
Yeah, I would be curious to hear from the leasing agent and from you, maybe, just like what specific challenges are. I'm also going to maybe this is a question for staff, but when I was looking at the SEU application and the citizen participation, it's dated 2021.
That's
Did it really take this long to bring this?
Yeah, the petition, yes. It's been a long journey of revisions and a little bit of pausing on the behalf of the petitioner.
Multiple revisions
Okay.
of traffic studies.
Okay.
So, yes.
I was like, is that date wrong?
No, it's it's our last project in our old software system too, so hopefully we're going to get this moved on one
Okay.
way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just note, like, I don't find the answers in, like, the special exception use application to be all that compelling for a drive-through. But I would love to hear more from people with more experience in leasing retail as to whether or not a drive-through would actually enhance the leasability of this building. I don't know if that segues.
Commissioner Lee.
Sure. Looking at the CoStar current listing, it has been listed for 66 months and 1 day. So constructed in 2018, this has sat vacant for the entire time. Doing retail leasing, I will say that the actual presence of a drive-through does improve the leasability. It's not a guarantee, but it does improve the likelihood. Tenants like Chipotle, Starbucks, they have opted towards really focusing on drive-throughs, especially during COVID. Obviously, it is antithetical to some of the values that we have pronounced at this particular table, but I will say that it will likely increase the probability. I don't imagine that a building owner wants to say, I'm just going to chop the back half of my building off. It is only after 5 years of sitting vacant, paying taxes and probably appealing taxes. I haven't looked at the tax records, but my guess is, this isn't quite the dark box theory, it's not a big enough one, but my guess is that after a certain level, you continue to appeal simply on the basis that you have no income. All you're doing is incurring expenses. So I would urge, kind of on a contextual basis, when you look at this, there's a Bell Tire, there's a Tim Hortons with a drive-through, Taco Bell. I'm certainly, and I think that the part that I'm somewhat, my feedback for you guys would be to say, what is the pronounced public benefit arising from this contextually? And so I will say, to answer your question, that the feedback would be the presence of a drive-through would likely increase leasability for certain retail tenants, possibly not others, but that this decision to undertake such a renovation would not be the top choice for a landlord, right? They'd rather put the money into, tenant improvement allowances and say, if I could just financially incentivize the tenant to go in there in its current building footprint. So from the standpoint of understanding, what is the highest and best use, what is the, from even, I will also say this, that there is carbon emissions that come from undertaking such construction, right? The transport of the demolition. And so looking at it holistically, it can be somewhat challenging. So I would challenge and encourage you guys to really say, hey, this is the public benefit. This is how much tax revenue that you may receive. I am certainly sympathetic to the idea that it's sat vacant for 5 years. That is not an easy thing to basically absorb. And looking at this, it looks like they've been through a few different listing agents, at least 2. So that would be my feedback. I understand how we have looked at this in the past for drive-throughs. This is probably a last resort of saying, guys, I've been trying. It's way embedded in the back. It's a very awkward looking parcel. There's no ingress from the Ellsworth side. This is something that I need to be able to put the parcel to productive use. So that would be my feedback. It would just really behoove the petitioner to really, I think, articulate that public benefit. So hopefully that feedback is helpful. Thanks.
If I could add to the discussion, one, from the perspective of staff, the noticing error alone, we would encourage this to be postponed on that basis. It's unfortunate that it was overlooked. Sometimes it happens with postcards that do go out. So that does seem like a good enough reason, in addition to having a fuller body to consider that. But I would also like to draw the Commission's attention to page 207 of the UDC, where we outline the criteria for approval of SEUs, of these special exception uses, and public benefit is not an explicit requirement to be articulated. There is a kind of 5-point test that was also laid out in the staff report for this item, and those include to be consistent with the general objectives of the city master plan, to be designed, constructed, operated, maintained in a manner that's compatible with the existing and planned character of the general vicinity, consistent with the general character of the neighborhood, considering population density, design, scale, bulk, intensity, and character of activity, not detrimental to the use, peaceful enjoyment, economic value, or development of neighboring property or the neighborhood area in general, and not have a detrimental effect on the natural environment. So I would just greatly encourage discussion to revolve around the outlined criteria that's in the city code.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lee.
Thank you for that. I was actually looking frantically. There's 68 special
It is a large
exception use. So
document.
I was like, oh no, what's the criteria? And to, again, that's very helpful. Again, our job is to apply the UDC as written. And for the folks that spoke, Ken Garber, for example, talking about the credit union, for example, and I do think that the distinction might be that we have, I believe others at the table brought up Plymouth as future designation as a potential TC1. In fact, we do have that legislative text here from City Council directing us to begin that process. So I would say that that's probably the contextual distinguishing factor. But that it's very helpful. Again, generally I'm trying to be the one deferring to the actual text of the UDC. So thank you again for that reminder.
No problem. And this is allowed in half of our mixed-use zoning districts as a special exception use, if I'm not mistaken. Took a look at that earlier. So although there may be intentions of the commission to move in a different direction, it is available for people within the code. And I think in the spirit of fairness, it's good to just remember that that has not been removed by policy.
Further discussion?
Just two, I'm not sure if they're points or questions, but I think I remember from the last time we talked about a special exception use. I think I remember having it explained that, actually, I think we were talking about whether or not to make certain things in TC1 a special exception use or not. I remember that. So, and I remember having it explained that the idea of a special exception use is that it's a use that you think is okay in some contexts, but not others. Is that okay? So, the point about consistency was raised and that we denied one of these on Plymouth, but I think that whenever we make our decision on this one, we might think about what's different about this context, because I want to be clear that it is not inconsistent of us to approve them sometimes and to approve a drive-through sometimes and not others, because it's in the nature of a special exception use that you approve them sometimes but not others. Otherwise, you would simply ban them, and if we want to simply ban them, we could do that, but we haven't yet. So, and I mean, if council would go on. So it is possible for us to say yes to one and no to another, or whatever else. The one criterion that I think has been brought up by us in the past and this evening by a couple of callers is would fit under the question of a detrimental effect on the natural environment. So we can think about that too, because we have some time to think. Yep, okay, I think those are my 2 points.
Further discussion? Commissioner?
I would motion to postpone this particular proposal at this time. Is that appropriate? I don't know if there's further discussion.
Staff would recommend July 18th as a proposed date for postponement.
I would motion to postpone this until July 18th.
Seconded by Commissioner Dish. Discussion about postponement. Commissioner Waitch.
Just a process question. So the motion to postpone sits at the table, so it only needs a majority, not all 6 votes, to postpone. So a majority of the commission, so that would be 4. So half plus 1.
My understanding is you would need 5 people to postpone.
Oh, you're saying it's 5?
We can check the bylaws, but
I just want to know. I'm whipping votes.
No, I think it would be a majority of presence. This is not on a petition.
Right.
So you have a quorum of members. You have more than 5 members here. So it would be the majority of present. You are not, this would not be the definitive action on a petition. So, that's how I would interpret it. It would be the majority of those presents, which would require 4 to postpone.
Okay.
Yeah. Which staff would recommend, as Deputy Manager Kelly articulated.
Further discussion on the motion. Okay. Vote on the amendment.
on the motion to postpone the present petition to July 18th, Commissioner Weiss.
No.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Dish.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Yeah. Yes.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Yes.
That motion carries.
Okay, back to the right, no, we're done. That's it.
It's postponed.
Okay, we don't move back. We don't have to move back. Oh, gosh, yeah. Great. Yes, both were taken together. And now we move to public comments. This is an opportunity for persons to speak up to 3 minutes about any issue that is not listed on the public hearing, any issue at all. I'm just going to end that sentence there. We will first call on individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants. To speak during the public hearing remotely, press star 9 if listening by phone, or use the raise hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by name if available for those accessing through the web link. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so we may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time?
Beg your indulgence for the 4th time tonight. On Lockwood electrification. You have to understand where we were at the end of January 2021 at City Council. This was a very controversial development. There was a lot of neighborhood opposition. It was a very different City Council that was much more skeptical of development. And one of the key promises that the developer made that pushed this over the edge to approval was the electrification promise. And I'm going to read you part of the letter from the Vice President of Development of Lockwood's companies that was sent to Mr. Kowalski just 5 days before that vote. Below, please find Lockwood Company, Mr. Kowalski, below, please find Lockwood Company's response to a request made by the City Council regarding electrical heat on the Lockwood Ann Arbor project. The electric heat issue was brought up at the planning meeting, that's here, and Lockwood at that time committed to all electric stoves and to investigate with MISTA the steps required to provide all electric heat. Following our investigation, Lockwood is committed to doing all electric heat. And there's some more about the MISTA requirements, but it sounds like they checked with MISTA and MISTA was okay. This is plausible to me because we have a housing commission that also depends on MISTA funding heavily, and they're going forward, I believe, with several all-electric developments. I see Commissioner Dish nodding her head. They've gotten waivers from MISTA. What's with Lockwood? Apparently, I mean, to me, this is just a bald bait and switch. I'm really pissed off. And I feel total futility on this point because electrification wasn't written in to the supplemental regulations on this project. I don't know what to do about it, but, except raise hell at City Council. I just really feel betrayed. And maybe there is something going on with MISTA that I'm not aware of here that would provide extenuating circumstances for the developer. But short of that, this is just unacceptable. So I don't know. I've gotten that off my chest, along with everything else tonight. So thank you for providing me a psychological comfort and an audience for my rantings again. But this one is really, out of the pale. This is behavior that I've never seen before, in front of this body. I'm just really upset. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garber. See no one in the room. Is there anyone who would like to address remotely?
There are no hands.
All right. Closing public hearing. We'll move on to commission proposed business. Is there any? Commissioner Lee.
I'll be quick. I just wanted to add that I'm very sympathetic to Mr. DeHart's discussions that he's been living there since 1959. And so the depth of history and the sense of place that you build is, I wanted to say that I'm very sympathetic to that and certainly, and wanted to clarify also that where I saw this was that this PUD was almost clerical in nature, given that BOMA standards that we use for measurements are within a 2% tolerance. And so you could have an architect with the same training, they might get two very small different measurements. And so this kind of measurement, again, it almost seems like a technicality. I agree with you. I have to obviously look into the email, Mr. Garber. So I certainly share your frustration. I also just wanted to mention that that Mr. DeHart's comments did not go unheard, that I truly felt, again, sympathetic about. Somebody who's, it's their home, it's their lifelong home. So just wanted to say that, and I'll be trying to look more into this email chain that you just raised. Thanks.
Commissioner Waite.
I think I raised this before, but if I haven't, I'd like to raise it again or now, which is I think we as a commission should consider figuring out if we can ask council to approve alternates for planning commission because a majority of the commissioners work in the field and often find themselves in need of recusal, as well as travel, family, all those other kinds of things. And it is not, I think it's inside our purview to elect alternates who would potentially just be available to serve when we don't have a full majority. And I think it takes pressure off of petitioners, it takes pressure off of the commission, and it activates maybe a handful of additional people who won't have to serve at every meeting, but can allow us to move business forward. So I don't know the procedure for doing that, whether that is a conversation with staff that comes to the commission as a amendment to our bylaws, or if it's something that we discuss with the chair and a recommendation to council or directly to the mayor. But I would strongly recommend that we consider having alternates, and it is not unheard of for a planning commission to have alternate members.
We acknowledge the comment, and Manager Leonard is happy to bring that up with our city attorney to see what could be discovered in terms of language, if it doesn't exist in your bylaws or should be added, to address that comment. So thank you.
Okay, I have one. I'm going to, just for the record, I don't have an immediate urgency for this relative to a lot of our housing and sustainability goals, but I think it does relate, which is vehicular use to parking maximums, how we allocate them, and drive-throughs. So I think we just need to start looking back at car storage and movement in our city in private land. So proposal to look at cars begrudgingly.
Also acknowledge the comment. Parking maximums are, if they're not on your official work plan, they are definitely on a list maintained by staff. There are some, as you know, large projects that we are front-loading our attention onto, including the rezoning of the Plymouth and Washtenaw corridors, which has been repeatedly requested by the same body.
I just want to add another tick to it.
It is continue to be acknowledged.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? All right. I think we go to adjournment. Moved by Commissioner White, seconded by Councilmember Dish. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.